This is the Compass Podcast, where we give you a glimpse of the divine and divine disruptions in the everyday. Hey, Pierce, how's it going?
It's going good, Ryan.
Good.
How are you?
I'm doing well. My name is Ryan Dunn, and so thankful for people who are joining us on this podcast. And we are about disruptions. As we're recording this, we're in this season of remembering the great disruption. We're in Christmas season of 2021. And of course, that lasts for quite a while after December 25th. I want to note that, hey, we can continue to carry this Christmas ideal forward into the future for several weeks. Doesn't mean you have to leave the lights and the tree up, but hopefully some of the practices that we put in place over Christmas stick with us for several weeks and even into the months. So we remember at Christmas this great disruption that God entered into our human story. And I want to reflect on that for our podcast today, Pierce, as we do kind of need that in this season. Like, here we are in 2021. We're wearied because we're facing some of the same things that we were facing in 2020 in terms of like shutdown. You know, I know that my church is not doing the things that we had planned to do for the Christmas season. I don't know about yours, Pierce.
Yeah, so far we've taken some extra precautions, but we are moving forward.
Yeah. So with that in mind, I thought it might just be uplifting for us to quickly share some of the ways that, the presence of God has disrupted us over the past year, because we could use a little bit of good news. I feel like maybe it's just me, but
no, I am with you.
So as we reflect on this past year, it's easy for us to note the hardships of it. So we're just going to skip over that because everybody knows what it is. And instead, I want to note on the disruptions, the God moments, the spirit movements that have happened for us over this past year. So I know I'm just throwing this at you, Pierce, but has anything jumped to mind?
Yeah, when you texted me this to give me a little bit of a heads up on
it's not an easy question
content.
to answer. Be like, okay, so show me the evidence of the Spirit in your life. Just, off the cuff conversation.
And so, no, I think this year has been a year that for me, I think there have been seasons within the year, as not just like weather seasons, but seasons within the year of my walk with Christ that have definitely been really quiet. And going like, God, I need you to speak. I need you to do something. I am struggling. I'm doing whatever. And there have been moments where he has been so present that it's eerie, and let me be really upfront. Like the latter is the exception.
Yeah, sure.
It's not what I walk around within daily. But not to go into a ton of detail, but a little bit, on my birthday this year, I woke up. My birthday is May 5th. I woke up on my birthday. And for the first 2 hours that I was up, I was I was just kind of like going through my regular routine of making coffee and taking my daughter to daycare and coming back home. But it was my birthday, so I had taken off half the day. My wife had taken off half the day. We were going to go into Nashville, which we live about 15 minutes outside the city, and go to brunch for my birthday. And then we were going to come back and head into work on the back half of the day. And the first 2 hours I was up, I was living through this reality that wasn't real. And the reason I was living through the reality, that sounds kind of weird, living through this reality that wasn't real, is I'd had a dream the night before. But the dream was so real. I'd never had this happen before me. I woke up and I thought the dream was real life.
Yeah, okay. Mm-hmm.
And so a friend texted me randomly about my birthday, and the way that she worded the text revealed to me that, no, that was a dream, and it scared me. Not a crisis of faith thing, nothing big. But it was funny. When I was telling my wife about it weeks later, she was like, "Why didn't you tell me it to me?" And I was like, "Well, I thought you knew. Like in the dream, I had talked to you about all this stuff," and so that really just led to a few months of like spiritual directions weekly and counseling weekly, and just trying to process the dream. And so I go to this, that happened in May. I go, and I had this moment in counseling at the end of July that I really felt like I met with Jesus. And And but as like the human heart does, maybe, and maybe it's the enemy. I don't know, but it's like, you leave that moment with Jesus. It was in a counseling session, and you begin to question everything. Like, was that
Oh,
Jesus,
yeah,
or
yeah.
was it just like the comfortability of the chair and the ambiance of the counselor's
Yes.
office,
Yeah.
and
Was this
all of
contrived?
those
And
kind of,
yeah,
yeah, was it emotional
yeah.
based, like all those kind of things. And so, long story short, I was at a conference in September, and that I work at, and help out at. And at the end, my prayer going into the conference was, God, would you confirm some of the things that I think you said in that session? And I think that you've been speaking to me. Will you confirm some of those things? And so, in the first session, I was standing on the front row, and the worship started, and this guy from the back of the room just came and laid down on the steps, kind of at the altar. There wasn't like a traditional altar, but he just like laid down. He just began to weep, and weeping in a way that like his body was moving, and all of us have been through so much over the last year and a half, and then add the pandemic, you know, and you could tell this guy, man, he was just holding so much in, and I don't know his name, had no idea who he was, and so, but I just felt God say, like, you've asked me to speak into your life at this conference. Why don't you speak into this young man's life? And so I went up, I put my hands on him, I prayed for him for a few minutes, and I got up and returned to my seat. And he stayed on the floor and got up maybe 10 minutes later, and then kind of went back to his seat. We never connected. Still to this day, I don't know
Yeah.
who he
Okay.
was. And and so after that session was over, I was standing on the side of the auditorium, the room that we're in, church. And this guy came up that we're Twitter friends, like,
Yeah.
I mean, that kind of thing. And I have another podcast that I do, and he was a guest on the podcast in our first or maybe early second season, but that was like over a year ago, and so like we had never met and in person, and he definitely did not know what I was going through the summer, very few people did. And he came over and he was like, "You're Pierce." And I was like, "Yeah." And I said, "You're Matt." And so we started talking. Da, da, da. And he said, "I think God like spoke to me about you. Is it okay if I just share what I feel like God said?" And I said, "Sure." And he began
Were
to,
you a little
as you
reticent
say,
at that? Because I mean, that
"Oh
could
my
be like
gosh,
really
yes,
disruptive in itself, right? That could be unsettling.
yes,
Maybe that's a better way to put it. Be like, okay.
100%." It's like I don't know if I trust this at all, you know, and and uh, and so if I wanted to manipulate that, I could have been like, "Yeah, before you tell me, let me tell you what I have been
Mm,
going through,"
mhm.
and so I didn't, and I said, "Yeah, you can tell me." And he wasn't what he told me. Basically, he said, I have seen, God said that you have been wrestling with him like Jacob, and for the last 5 to 6 months. And recently he told you something in prayer, and he just wanted you to know that could be that you can hold on to that word that was him.
Mm,
And so it wasn't this like super specific in the sense of like he didn't tell me what I was wrestling
sure.
about.
Yeah.
He didn't tell me what Jesus had told me. He didn't, and he didn't know what I'd been through, but it was specific enough to know that like, no, this is from God. Like I came into this thing asking God to confirm the prayer that he gave me, or in the time of prayer back in July. This is September, 2 months later. And more so than um like receiving the word, it was that thing of like, yeah, God does see me.
Mm, hmm.
God sees me, and he is with me, and he does love me, and none of those things did I question in this season. But it was, no, God was gracious enough and kind enough to like speak to another
Mm.
friend, to tell me and remind me in a way that only he could do. And man, those things don't happen often. I mean, I can name on my one hand, how many times that has happened over my
Right.
life. And and I have been in some weird church services. Like, let's be real. Like, I've been in some weird church services where people have come up to me and go, "God spoke to me about you," and they told me things. I was like, "No, he didn't.
That
That's not
wasn't okay.
that's not correct
Mm,
at all." But there have been a few times where God has been gracious. And a friend of mine that I did know at that conference, and didn't we were talking on the last day, separate from this conversation, and he just said, "Pierce, God is too tender and too kind to let you miss it if you will come with open hands. And he was talking about what the subject matter we were talking about, but we were also talking about just the fact that the posture of God. The posture of God is that he desires a relationship with us. He desires time with us. I'm actually preaching this week on the 26th, the day after Christmas, on Jesus at 12 years old. It's his first words that he ever speaks that we get the recording of, right? Like, obviously he said stuff before he was 12, but this is the first words that we receive. And these first words are in response to him staying back in Jerusalem, his parents going forward, and then them coming back. So long story short, he's missing for 3 days. If you've not read the story, it's in Luke chapter 2. He's missing for 3 days, and his parents come back to find him. And there's so much dynamic going on. It's like, how can your parents not know you're missing for a day? And it's like, well, the culture was different there. You were raised by the community. So I'm sure that, like, Mary was like, I'm sure he's with Joseph. And Joseph's like, I'm sure he's with Aunt Bill, Uncle Bill, Aunt whoever.
First century Judea,
whatever.
Different names. Yeah.
And, first century. And so anyway, long story short, they find him, and he's in the temple, and he's asking questions, and he's listening to the teachers. And they say, Mary says, why would you do this to me and your father? And Jesus says, well, why were you searching for me? And that sounds like a defensive 12-year-old answer, but then he has this line. He says, didn't you know I must be about my father's business? And he roots, and so to me, so often, especially growing up in the church with loving parents, but parents that said, like, if the doors of the church were open, you're going to be there. That kind of mindset with khakis and a polo on, like,
take off your hat when you come inside, Pierce. Come on.
Right. You have your church shoes. And so we could easily read that scripture out of obligation, like Jesus was obligated to be about the Father's business. But I think it's something so much deeper. I think he's saying, this is my deepest desire to be with the Father and to be about his business. Not out of obligation, but out of desire from my identity in him. And the same identity that Christ had. Obviously, we're not the Son of God. Like, we don't hold that. But we are called God's children, his beloved sons and his beloved daughters. He deeply desires that in us. And I think so often we run a pace of life that is so fast that, man, we're not going slow enough to see him speak to us. Because I believe when I read scripture that God is always speaking, maybe not audibly. I've never heard God audibly. But that'd be awesome. That'd be pretty cool. But I think that's, when you read scripture and it says, like, God appeared, or Jesus appeared, or the angel of the Lord appeared. And it's like the first words are always, do not be afraid, because it's frightening if an angel shows up at your house. And, but yeah, I think we're called to slow down, but
that's why it can be so unsettling when somebody else comes to us and says, I have a word for you, or I just have this inclination that, maybe I'm supposed to speak this to you, because, hearing that word can be frightening. And it's frightening a lot of times because what I'm anticipating as the hearer, hearing is something that I have been reluctant to hear. I don't want to hear confirmation of that thing that I've been avoiding, or, that unsettling situation that I need to press into. And I'm often afraid that that's what's going to come out. Yeah.
And so what we have to do in that moment, one, let's be really clear in the story of, like, somebody telling you, like, God spoke to them about you. I do believe that happens, obviously, but I also believe that scripture tells us we test every word. Like, any word that is given to us. So, like, we have to know the heart of the Father. The heart of the Father is not to bring shame upon you. It's not to beat you over the head with the places that you've messed up. No, it's gentle and loving. Peter denies Jesus over a charcoal fire in the last night of Jesus' betrayal, all that kind of stuff. But then Jesus restores Peter over a charcoal fire days later, and so, like, he's not coming at this like judgmental. I mean, he has a wrath against sin, like, I do believe that, but he doesn't have a wrath against us. And And he so deeply loves us. And I think if we can begin to step into and understand the reality and truth that he is gentle, he is kind, he is tender with us, just as we are with our children, hopefully, on our good days. He is perfect, so he is always that way with us. But a good parent does correct, does do those things. I think we'd be more willing to listen and look for him if we understood that posture of him, not so much the authoritarian kind of thing that sometimes he gets put into.
Yeah. But even still, the presence and intervention of God can rattle us. I mean, it can cause some uncomfortable situations. The witness of Jesus is that over and over again, right? Jesus enters into these situations that makes the hair stand up for some people, causes some places of discomfort. When I was thinking about this question, like, where has God shown up recently? There's this, I don't know if it's right to say it's a trap, but there's this tendency that we all have to then immediately think about, like, what's going good in my life, you know, in a sense that when God shows up, I'm happy. And that's not always the case. So I really wanted to resist that. Like, I didn't want to answer this question and saying, like, Pierce, here are the good things that are happening in my life right now. Because, you know, I can see God at work in that, but that's not the only way that God is at work. You know, God is at work in me rattling some of the comfort out of my life and pushing me into those uncomfortable places. And one of the ways that that's happened for me over the past year, I think, his indication of things that are happening in our society in general. So right now, as we're recording this at the end of 2021, there are a lot of things that are shut down or that have slowed down. You know, our lives aren't, I don't need to say this again and again, but I will, because our lives aren't what they once were. Things are moving at a different pace. But something has happened over the past 2 years where there has been a forward momentum and even a greater awakening in terms of, like, human justice, of people calling for justice for all people. I feel like more people are on board with that. Like, I've learned how to use my voice a little bit in that. I think that, you know, I've been pushed in that direction, and that's been a holy pushing, and that's been a good thing. And I think that this is where I see God in movement. The Spirit in movement is in this, this idea that even when things are slowing down, there's still this positive impetus, this positive momentum towards justice, and it's gaining more momentum. I know it's not going as fast as we would like, especially, you know, those who are affected by injustice. It's not going as fast as we need it to, but it's moving, right? There is more of an awareness. There are more voices now saying that, you know, Black Lives Matter, rights for all humanity. There's more people working towards that end. And I see that as a positive movement of God, like, even in the midst of, I think that's important to know, like, in the midst of a lot of other things kind of taking a back seat or slowing down or saying, you know, not in this season because of the pandemic, this is still picking up positive momentum. There's still this movement towards justice that is picking up momentum. And hopefully, like, imagine what happens when some of the restraints come off, when we're able to even more so congregate in community and en masse, how much more positive momentum comes out of this. So,
I think, you know, one of my friends in the pandemic, well, we're still in the pandemic, but in the early days of the pandemic, they were at home 24/7. They were kind of one of those persons that, like, traveled and spoke and different things like that. They kind of lived out of a suitcase. So they were stuck at home, et cetera, had all this free time, and they began to do, like, reading the Bible. I mean, I don't want extremely fast, you know, like, I mean, I want to say they read the Bible, like, in a month.
Yeah, okay.
Which, I mean, if you're reading the Bible in a month, you are flying through the scripture. And there's so many pros and cons. There's so many pros of, like, when you read things fast, what you get out of it. When you read things slow, what you get out of it. You know, I mean, there's pros on both sides. And so anyway, what she said, I asked, like, man, you read the Bible very quickly, you know, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. What's the thing that stuck out to you in this quick reading through scripture? And she was like, God's justice. He is adamant that his justice be done and be given. And she said, I don't know if I've ever seen it as clear as I read the whole book so quickly that I just saw the justice of God all the way through it. And that is God's heart. And I'm with you. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's cool.
Yeah. Well, man, I think that's all that we have for this time around, sir. We're going to leave it with that witness. So, real quick, hey, now that we've talked about how God has showed up, maybe what's one way that you're looking for God to show up in 2022?
Yeah, that's a great question. That one you did not.
No, I didn't. We'll call that a spirit movement.
Yeah. Yeah. How am I expectant? Is that what you're asking? How am I expectant of God moving in 2022? How am I expectant of God moving in 2022?
Something came to me. So if you want to continue to think about that, like I think that the nature of church is changing. And maybe in one sense, a positive way. We're going to lament that fewer people are participating in church than before. But I think what's happening in that same shift is that we are moving away from an event-driven mindset in church to a more relational mindset. And maybe that's where we should have been all along. So I see that happening as we move into 2022 and beyond.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I think for me, what I would love to, or I am expecting God to move in, is that his people will be known by his love. And so often we haven't been.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I don't think this is a blessing. I don't think this is, you know, none of those things, but I do see the same stripping away that the last 2 years has caused church and Christians and those that have been around the community of faith and refining, as you talked about earlier, can be a really good thing. And maybe we need to be refined about all the things we added to this faith that we call and hold on to so dear. And get back to, he says, hey, love God and love people, and they will know you by my love. And so if we can begin to course correct into that lane, man,
yeah, that's good.
We'll be sitting here with a lot of stories of how Jesus moved at the end of 2022.
Yeah, and for the person who's listening, who's still struggling to identify the movement of God over this past year or with expectation in the year ahead, I think about kind of like having a hedgehog principle. Before we hit the record button, we were talking about self-help books, and one of the great kind of organizational, motivational, productivity self-help books is Good to Great by Jim Collins. And I think it's in Good to Great that they talk about the hedgehog principle, that your organization or even you as a person kind of grab on to one idea, and this is what you retreat into when times are tough. And for me, it's paid to have like a theological hedgehog principle around what you just said, that God is love, that when we are looking for those moments when we're wondering if God is moving, like we may not be able to name the happiness of the situation, but we can look for where the movement of love is in a situation. Where love is, there God is as well. So that's what we'll be looking for in 2022. Well, Pierce, Merry Christmas to you. Hope you enjoy some kind of celebration, and then Happy New Year to you as well.
You as well, Ryan. Blessings.
Blessings. And hey, same to you, listener. We'll be catching up with you again in 2022. In the meantime, thank you so much for being a participant in the Compass Podcast. Peace.